Hi, my name is Dana Justus, and I'm very honored to be a part of today's Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Day for the Florida Holocaust Museum. As you may know, my grandmother Lisl Schick is a founding life member of the Florida Holocaust Museum. Many of you have been lucky enough to hear her personally share her remarkable story or have toured her wartime escape personal exhibit at the museum. And if you have not yet seen this wonderful collection of photographs, documents, and objects from her pre-war and kinder transport experience, it is being displayed at the museum until July 10th. She is thankfully still with us at age 94, but it is now my honor to present her story on my family's behalf. Because this day is centered around the testimony and stories of the Holocaust and those lucky enough to survive, I will be reading portions of my Nana's Lisl's interview by a British kinder transport researcher, which took place over the summer of 2020, so that you can hear her story in her own incredible words. Okay, well, I can start off by saying that I had a very pleasant life in Vienna before the Nazis came. We were a close family, and my parents, who are shown here on the slide, were very protective. They were married for 6 years before I was born. And at one point, my mother was told that she would never have children. So you can just imagine how they felt when I was finally born. As far as religion, we were absolutely not religious. We were not observant Jews. What happened in Vienna was that when a child was born, that child was given a religion. Mostly it was Catholic because Austria was a Catholic country. But if you were Jewish, that was fine too. But we did not go to temple or synagogue regularly. We might have gone once a year for the high holidays, but that was about it. Religion did not play an important part in my life at all. So my early life was very pleasant. We went on vacations, we had a beautiful apartment, and I went to school. That went on until Hitler marched into Austria in 1938 when I was 10. Things started to change very, very rapidly once he came to Austria. And I always say that the Austrians were not victims, as Hitler had lots and lots of support in Austria. You can see that in this picture, which shows members of the League of German Girls waving Nazi flags in support of the annexation of Austria. The first impact of the Nazis on my young life was that our nanny, Freda, who I adored, had to leave our household because no Christian woman could live in a Jewish home if she was under 45. So when Freda packed her bags, that was the first tragedy in my young life. Then one day I walked into my classroom at school and I noticed right away that the crucifix on the wall was gone. In its place was a huge portrait of Hitler, and you were supposed to give it the Nazi salute. Well, I don't know how smart this was of me, but I hadn't heard such good things about Hitler, so I ignored it and I didn't salute Hitler. The teacher looked at me but didn't say anything, and I walked into my classroom and started to talk to my friends. But then my friends just looked at me and they said, "Don't talk to us. Don't talk to us ever again. We don't want anything to do with you." And I was just shocked, and I stood there and I said, "Why? We didn't have a fight. What happened? Why won't you talk to me?" And they said, "We can't talk to you because you're a dirty Jew and we don't want anything to do with you anymore. We'll get in trouble if we play with you." So as you can imagine, for a 10-year-old girl, that was just devastating. And then the next thing that happened was that we went to our favorite swimming pool and there was a big sign, "No dogs and no Jews allowed." So they were putting us on the same level as an animal, but they treated the dogs better than they did the Jews. And then the same thing started happening wherever we went. No Jews were allowed to take out books at the library. No Jews could go to the movies, nothing. Our life was turned upside down in a matter of days. And then at this point during the interview, the researcher asked my Nana an important question. She said, "Did your parents consider leaving Austria at that point?" And my Nana said, "Well, I'll tell you. Everybody kind of thought about leaving, but when you don't want to face a situation, you try to rationalize." So my parents looked around and they said, "Well, there's still a lot of Jews living in Germany. They have lived there for 5 or 6 years now under Hitler, so maybe it won't be that bad." And anyway, we also couldn't really leave because it was very difficult to get into another country. Most of them weren't welcoming Jews with open arms, believe me. So we really rationalized it. Well, let's just wait and see. Maybe things will pick up and it won't be quite as bad as we think. But it kept getting worse. People started losing their jobs, being sent to prison, and then, as we later found out, concentration camps. That all started very quickly in 1938. Now, if you had a lot of money, you might be able to buy your way out, but we were not in that situation. We lived comfortably, but we certainly didn't have a lot of money. My father was actually an accountant, and he worked in an international bank. This is a fact that later turned out to be very important. But pretty soon he lost that job because the bank was no longer allowed to employ Jews. So my father lost his very nice job. And because we had no income and no money, we moved in with my grandparents. Now, I was very close to my maternal grandmother, so I thought that would be wonderful, and I was very excited about it. But unfortunately, it was not the fun and games I had envisioned. Everyone was very tense and unhappy, but we had no recourse. We had no place to go. We just muddled along. And then, of course, in November, Kristallnacht happened, the night of broken glass. And that was really the beginning of the Holocaust. We didn't even know what was happening until we got ready to leave for school in the morning. We got downstairs and we couldn't even open the front door because of all of the broken glass all over. Every Jewish storefront that Nazis could identify had been broken into and looted. And then when we left the apartment, I saw the most horrific sight, and that really determined the rest of my life. Down the street, we could see hundreds of Jewish men on their hands and knees. They had little scrub brushes in their hands, and standing over them were the black shirted SS and the brown shirted SA guards. And they had whips in their hands, and those poor people on their hands and knees had to clean up the mess that the Nazis had made. And I was just beside myself, and I looked at my father, who I adored, and thought he could fix anything. And I said, "Daddy, can't you help? Can't you fix this? Can't you do something?" And my dad shook his head and he said, "No, there's nothing I can do." And when I saw my father so helpless and so beaten down, I knew that was the end of it for us in Austria. So as a quick pause from my Nana's story, these events all happened very quickly in late 1938 and early 1939. The English government agreed to take in Jewish children under the age of 17, placing them in British foster homes, hostels, schools, and farms. In total, the Kindertransport program rescued about 10,000 Jewish children between December 1938 and September 1939. And once England and Germany were at war, things became too dangerous and the rescue efforts had to stop. And overall, the statistics show that only about 10% of the Kindertransport children ever saw their parents again. And although my Nana and her younger brother Walter were miraculously reunited with both of their parents after the war, they were still separated for 6 years. And as an aside, I'm sure none of us can even imagine putting your children on a train to a foreign country, almost 1,000 miles away, not knowing if you'll ever see them again. It's truly unthinkable to most people, and certainly most parents. But as we're unfortunately seeing again today in Ukraine, ordinary people sometimes have to do the unimaginable in the face of evil and potential annihilation. So back to my Nana story. In April 1939, they boarded the Kindertransport train. Lisl was 11 and her brother Walter was 6. And this photo here was taken in Vienna just a few months before they left. As my Nana tells, my parents said to me, "Look, Walter is so young. He does not understand what is going on. You have to promise us you will always look after Walter." And I said, "Absolutely, I will take care of him." And I will tell you, we were never separated the whole time we were in England, which I was very proud of. We left on the train late in the evening because, of course, the Nazis didn't want people to see the things that were happening on the platform. The parents were crying, the children were crying. It was not a very happy situation. And we, of course, had numbers around our necks on signs to make sure we knew where we were going to go and the people who picked us up accordingly. It was quite a long trip. We had to go through Germany, Austria, Holland, and then we departed the train at Hoek van Holland and took a ferry across the English Channel. And we landed, I think, in Dover, somewhere around there. And the next stop was Sussex, where we went to a British boarding school. We were there for about 6 months, and then we were shifted to another boarding school. After our first 2 schools on the eastern English coast, the Germans started bombing that side of the country very heavily. So many school children and refugees were sent to Western England on the border of Wales, which was a lot safer. So after our 3rd school in that area, we were moved to host families. I was not with the same family as my brother Walter, but he was on the next street over. We saw each other all the time and walked to school together. So we were very, very close. And I always made sure he had done his homework and he was doing well. And it was actually not an unhappy time for us. And we did get a very good education, even though we didn't know a word of English when we came over, but children learned very quickly. I was an okay student. My brother was a fabulous student, and he became a very smart man. And then a very important development took place. My father's former employer, the International Bank, was able to sponsor him to go to England. So he came over in June 1939 and even was able to live near us for a time. But then the war broke out and the British government arrested enemy aliens for fear that they might be German spies and sent them to internment camps. These weren't concentration camps, but some of them were pretty rough. Thankfully, my dad was pretty lucky. He was sent to the Isle of Man for 2 years. We could write to him, but the letters were censored, and we could not see him for 2 years. But one small silver lining, my dad happened to be a championship chess player. So he started playing chess with his fellow prisoners, and he taught quite a lot of them how to play. And then many, many years later, when my parents ended up moving to Clearwater, my dad became the chess coach for Clearwater High School, and they won a lot of tournaments. Next, you're probably wondering what happened to my mother. She was also very, very lucky. My dad had a distant cousin in New York who he somehow found, and she had some very wealthy friends who gave her family an affidavit issued by the American government saying, let this family come over. They won't be a burden to the American people because we will take care of them. Now, that's a pretty hefty promise to make for a family, for people who you don't know at all. But that piece of paper truly saved my mother's life. My mother was able to take the last boat that left Europe at that time to go to New York to safety, because that was when the deportations to the East really started. And unfortunately, after my mother left Vienna, the Nazis commandeered the apartment where her whole family was staying. They put them on trains and sent them to, we're not sure where, to Poland or Russia, wherever they sent the people they killed. And all of my grandparents, including my favorite grandmother, were sent to the East and killed by the Nazis. And so, considering, my mother was very, very lucky. So my mother got to New York in May of 1940, and she worked for families as a maid and a cook. And of course, you can imagine how sad she was, leaving her parents and the rest of her family, and her children and her husband being 3,000 miles away. It was very, very difficult, and she was very, very unhappy. But at least we were able to contact her and write to her, which was really something in those days. So 4.5 more years went by. My dad was released from the internment camp in 1942, and he was able to live near Walter and me until we left England in late December 1944. I had my 17th birthday on the ship. We sailed across the Atlantic for 2 weeks. It was a very rough crossing, but we didn't mind because we were so excited we were coming to New York. And here is a photo of the family reunited in New York. And now I'm going to tell you the happiest part of my story. Before the rest of the family came to New York, my mother was walking along on Fifth Avenue, a very big, busy street in a very big, busy city. And who should she run into but her best friend from high school in Vienna? That family was also Jewish, and they had come to New York together because they were very, very wealthy. So they were very well known in Vienna for having a very big business. So the Nazis imprisoned the father right away. He was in prison for 3 months, and the mother, Martha, she was a very smart lady. She got all the papers together and they signed everything over to the Nazis. Real estate, apartment, business, everything they owned. They gave it to the Nazis and then they were able to leave. So once Martha and my mother reunited in New York, their family treated my mother like a member of their own family. She went to their apartment for holidays and birthdays, and it really made her life quite a bit happier and nicer when she was missing her children and her husband for so long. So once we landed in New York in January 1945, one of the first things we did was go to meet this family. The mother and the father were there, and the daughter, Ellie, was there too. And she was just about my age, and we became very, very close friends. We just clicked. And the son was still in the American Army, and then he was in medical school at the University of Rochester. So we didn't meet him until a couple of years had gone by in 1948. And Ellie called me and she said, listen, you've never met my brother. He's finally coming to town. Would you like to meet him? And I clearly wasn't very excited. So my mother said to me, listen, if he calls you, you're not to insult that wonderful family. They've been so good to me. So you will go out with him. And I said, yes, yes, leave me alone. Let's see if he calls. Well, he did call and we did go out. And I came home that night and I said to my mother, for once you were right. I've just met the man I'm going to marry. And sure enough, within the year, I married him in July 1949. So he was the most wonderful man. He became a very, very successful radiologist, and he was actually the first Jewish doctor in Clearwater, Florida. We had a wonderful marriage. We had 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and now I have 6 great-grandchildren. So I like to say that was our revenge against Hitler. And now we've come to the end of my Nana's incredible story. So here are a few photos to document the amazing family that she and my poppy, Al Schick, created. Here are the local members in the Tampa, St. Pete area, and then almost 30 of us for Thanksgiving this past year. And of course, I urge you to please go see the museum's exhibit of her personal items from the Kindertransport and after the war. The exhibit is titled The Wartime Escape of Lisl Porges, and it is on display until July 10th. Thank you so much for listening, for bearing witness to the unimaginable events of the Holocaust and the Kindertransport, and for helping support the Florida Holocaust Museum's vitally important work. Thank you.